Hi, this is the first edition of the podcast on Space Village and people that are making a big difference and also helping others on their journey into becoming space robust. And we'll provide further definition of space robust as we put more sessions into this. More important, I would like you to meet Cliff Beek. He is a pleasure to talk with. He runs a very novel concept. He runs the Constellation Corporation. He's a very accomplished person, traveled uh, all over the world. He has I'm going to call it a passion for uh, making business with many different countries. But really, really important is his over arching views of the world and the way that, in this case, cybersecurity can also be done in space. Is very humble on saying that some of the ideas were not his, and also presenting you new pathways into how do you become a good company in space? How do you overcome obstacles? He also presents in this conversation a lot of his experience in the field, in the sector. So enjoy.
Thank you.
So I've started recording. Cliff, thank you very much for coming to the interview, conversation, talk. Gonna have a blast, I'm sure, because you've got so many good stories between volunteering, Richard Branson on your side, on your left side in one of the interviews, also your connections across the world, and your volunteering life. I want to start first of all, for thanking you. Okay, it started from that, from the book from Robert Jacobson, and looking into your work and your ideas, and then I was a bit, I was going to say cheeky. I designed the process calling cybersecurity. I said, well, let's hope that you don't say the process is wrong. But thanks for being here.
Sure, Gonzalez, thank you for this opportunity to talk to you. It's my pleasure to be here, and happy St. Patrick's Day. Today is March 17th, so I'm wearing some green, so to have the Irish. So
okay. That's a good point. Uh, I'd like to start from the beginning. That is, how did you arrive to the idea of your company? How did you get to build, to put cybersecurity in here,
yeah,
and product as unique? And I also would like for you to talk about the team.
okay.
But I would say these are separate things because I think they believe that they are in different levels. But where are you at?
The concept of securing data in off-terrestrial networks was not my idea. It was not an original idea that I had. It was actually founded by a gentleman by the name of Hushan Khan, who is an entrepreneurial individual and lives in Los Angeles, California. And I was introduced to him through a mutual friend from Space Systems Loral. And we sat down and met at one of the conferences where most people meet at the Satellite 2015. Going back a couple of years or a few years.
Okay.
He talked to me about this idea of using geostationary satellites to secure data, to get it off the ground. And I listened to the story and I thought it was an interesting story. And then the question I asked him was, how much capital do you need to raise? Which was exorbitant. I mean, it was close to $1 billion. And I thought at that time, that was going to be a very difficult lift and a challenge, because there's a lot of data storage companies on the ground that have lots of security built in. But then as we shook hands and left, and I went on about my business and went back to a company that I have in Singapore, I was learning a lot about the cybersecurity hacks and the breaches of well-known retail stores, hospitals, the ransomware that occurs, data that's getting, I guess, hijacked in motion. And I started thinking about this company, Cloud Constellation. So to fast forward it, I got involved with them. And my biggest point was, look, we need to bring the capitalization down to under $500 million. And then we need to engineer this so that we don't have to run into a lot of the regulatory hurdles that you run into when you're trying to compete globally. So we came up with this design. But the most important thing about your initial question is, why space? Well, when you think about the space and you think about, the physical separation from Earth, if you can put data and move it efficiently in what I would consider like a Dropbox, where you can put this data where it has very limited access from public infrastructure. I mean, that's the most sort of vulnerable communication networks, is your DNS servers, your entry points where you get hacked. And if you can take vital, sensitive, security, highly secure information and you want to move it globally, the last thing you want to do is push it out through a public ISP that traverses, multiple peering points and interconnection points globally, because that's really where I think the vulnerabilities are. So our idea was to get it off the ground and move it in space. And so we basically, when you mentioned our team, there was a group of engineers who are quite capable, who have had experience in building satellites, communication satellites, the communications component of satellites. We're able to have conversations and attract them and say, look, this is what we'd like to do. We would like to make space-hardened managed memory systems to store data, and not large cold data storage. This is data in motion. This is short-term data at rest. So then we began to explore who has those skill sets and who's capable of bringing this together. And quite honestly, it was not that big of a, of having to develop any real original IP. A lot of this is available in the market. You just need to be able to find the various components and find a system integrator that can pull it together for you.
And use the word system integrator. Is beyond the hardware, do you have people that play that role as system integrator, or were you like the architect and then you've got someone that ensures that the systems are integrated and performing?
Well, for most companies, particularly my role, we're entrepreneurial, and we work on a very, small budget to get started. So you do a lot of that yourself. So everyone has a specific role. So we have, for my particular role, I'm more involved on capital formations, raising capital to support it, developing the business plan, finding, where in the market can this product really provide a solution that makes sense, having conversations. I mean, so you have two groups. You have your engineers who can just demonstrate, how they would build this thing. And then you have your commercial, someone like myself, more on the commercial side. Okay, well, if we build it, that's great. You guys have this wonderful opportunity to build this and idea, but who's going to use it? Who are our customers?
Yes,
so you have to validate all parts of it. So in terms of that, I spent a lot of time, there are very capable large system integrators out there that you could go to if you have a checkbook with unlimited funds.
Yes.
We're very opportunistic. We do a lot of this in the beginning ourselves, and you do a lot of your own system integrating. You're able to try to find vendors. You do a lot of your own research. You call a lot of people. You ask a lot of questions. And then there are a number of system integrators and manufacturers that are positioned to do this for you once you're funded. But your biggest challenge is you've got to build your business case, identify a solution that you're solving. The biggest thing is, how are you changing the world with your product? I mean, what makes this different? Just because you have a great mousetrap doesn't mean you're going to catch more mice.
Yes.
And you need to be able to demonstrate that what you are doing makes a lot of sense, and it changes the way behavior in the commercial environment, and it actually provides a value-added service. So there's there's the engineering component with the system integration work, finding the right solutions, the right vendors at a price point that makes sense. And you've got to find a vendor who really believes in your project, who kind of looks at this and says, I believe in this, I'm going to commit my time to it. And then you've got to find, again, the most frequently asked question is, well, who's going to use this project? I mean, who's going to buy your service? And that became very clear after, and we can get into that. But that was identified early, and we were able to demonstrate it. And so the tough thing again is really finding the right vendors to source the components, because we were using optical lasers, or we planned to use optical lasers for our inter-satellite links between our low Earth orbit satellites. And we can take a moment just to talk about what that means. Is our project is originally to build 8 to 9 low Earth orbit satellites in a circular orbit at the equatorial plane, each of those creating a ring and interconnected through optical lasers. And so that's a challenge in itself, to be able to accomplish that and find vendors who actually can deliver that. There are plenty of groups who are developing free space optical lasers for space. Not a lot of them have been deployed for interspace communications. And then inside of those LEOs, we're hosting in our payload about 3 to 5 petabytes of data storage for managed memory storage and some compute capabilities. So, the components of what we are building were not a broadcast satellite. We're using space and satellite components to protect and move data globally, but we're not providing a broadcast network. We're not providing connectivity to the rural markets. We're actually a closed user network where access to our network is what we call dark. You have to be authenticated to be on the network. It's very secure. What we're selling and our idea is to move secure communications and data in a safe environment. So it's a little different, but yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of things that you need to kind of pull together. So system integrators are important, but you also have to be in a position to pay for them too. So,
okay. You mentioned a lot of the points when I was researching on cybersecurity because of your prompt and because of your company. A lot of the 14 or 21 control points of ISO 27000. And for the folks that are listening, ISO is a big organization where people come together and say, oh, this is the standard. We agree that every word in the standard means this, or at least we agree that it's exactly this.
Yeah.
And in particular, the 2700 brings the requirements for information management and the derailing of risk. Did you have, because ISO is more of an European thing, okay? Although it's all over the world, I know what I've seen is that ISO is more used in Europe. Overall, in your experience in the world, do you use standards to help on the business case, or is it more likely specify what do they need and then you tailor the solution, or is it an hybrid of both?
Well, because this is a security project, standards and FISO is critical. You have to be in compliance, and you need to demonstrate and certify that you have certifications. You're talking about dealing with financial institutions, governments. You're managing some very sensitive information. So standards, whether they are global, and you need to comply and demonstrate that you are actually in compliance with those standards. Now, to accomplish that, as a company like ours, we engage with the best and the brightest vendors that we can find. So for our security purposes, we engage with Thales Security, which had purchased Gemalto. Gemalto is one of the largest SIM card access management group in the world, and so we were able to get their attention, and they found our project to be of interest to them. They wanted to get into the space economy. And they're in the security business. So we formed a partnership where we would work together. They would help us with our platform of, our engagement for exchange of security keys with customers, set up that platform for us. So when we walk into a customer, your first customer you sit down with, one of the questions that would be, are you compliant with these standards, these global standards? And as soon as we say, well, we're having that done for us, managed by, for in this example, Thales Security, formerly known as Gemalto, it was like, okay, that's the platinum seal for that, and it usually helps to establish credibility and mitigate that sense of risk if there is a sense of concern from the customer. So yes, absolutely, standards are important, and especially when you're dealing with the types of information that our customers are handing to us. And I should qualify that because we don't get access to their data. We never have access to their data. We're flying these particular, what I would call data vaults, and all we're doing is providing the telemetry and the path. We don't have no access to their data. We don't have the keys to access their data. It's all managed by themselves through their own encryption services. So all we're doing is managing the platform so that it stays synchronized, it's flying properly, and if there are any issues, we're able to take care of those from an operational perspective.
That's a good point too, because I was trying to think, but do you get access to the data? No, you don't. It's very clear.
That's part of it. I mean, there's all the things when you talk about compliance, there's all these things like data protection laws, GDPR, that was established mostly in the European Union, that we have to certify that the data that's being hosted is not also being replicated in another country, that we're certifying that data is not being cached to another server off the network. So you think about it, we're in space, we're in this jurisdiction that is off planet, but we can certainly certify that we're not hosting that customer's data in another country. So that customer is not being subject to perhaps being subpoenaed or the jurisdiction of another potentially hostile country. So because that data is not traversing or ending up in a server that's being cached in another country. So again, from compliance and from a data protection compliance, the concept of having this constellation is kind of unique.
It is, and I'll get back to this because I lots of things came up to my mind, mostly because of yours. I'll go to the question right now. I'm derailing the script, but this just came, and I need to ask you this. You, in your path, you have been between the US, Middle East, many other countries. And what you just described, since we have a constellation up here and subpoenaed and other, that is, how did you get to this idea that I need to be global instead of I need to be local?
The economy is globalized. We're not, just operating in a vacuum in one country. Every country has dependencies on other countries for manufacturing, for banking. You think about just your government has probably over 100 ministries or embassies around the world. So there's a lot of secure communication that go between those enterprises. You have financial institutions that have large headquarters, perhaps in New York, London, Hong Kong, Sydney, Australia, where they have branch offices located around the world that send transactional data. So, our business model is global. It has to be global because, if it were just a domestic business case, they could use one satellite up and down, no double hopping.
Exactly.
So for us, it's a global solution.
As an entrepreneur, what is the best practice that you recommend? If there is one, you can talk about one.
Yeah.
But
there isn't any one particular. Things work differently for other people. Some people are, people think, oh, they're so lucky. But luck has something to do with it, but sacrifice, hard work probably has a little bit more to do it. Recognizing an opportunity is probably the key sort of differentiator. But what you try to do as an entrepreneur is learn as much as you can about the market or the industry or what you're trying to create. Learn as much as you can about a market, where the friction is, and what are you trying to solve. And so you have to begin a dialogue. You've got to go through a complete spectrum of conversations, sort of this concept of doing your due diligence. You want to talk to managers, people at all different levels, executives, middle management, marketing, entry level professionals, to find out, parts of the business that may make sense to you and understand where your risks are. I mean, you need to understand as an entrepreneur, how risky or likely of success versus, is this going to be just, a pipe dream that's just not going to happen. So you've got to kind of be smart about what you're doing and trying to assess opportunities. But with that said, what makes a difference is your commitment to a project, your focus, determination. I mean, it comes with sacrifices. It comes with a lot of different struggles. But I've never met anyone who's been successful that hasn't failed at something or hasn't struggled with like when you think of a really successful company, when you think about let's say an entrepreneur like an Elon Musk or SpaceX. Well, he's been doing this way before the last 5 years. He started probably, I don't know the exact date, but in early 2000, building these ideas, and you're seeing all the fruit of the successes now. But there are multiple times in the success of that business that no one is an overnight success story. It takes a lot of effort, sacrifice, and determination to be successful. So there isn't, and everyone works differently. There's different solutions for others. But one thing I can tell you that seems to be the common thread is focus, don't get distracted, determination, and being able to get through the tough times. Being creative, having a strong, fortitude to you get dealt bad hands sometimes, and brush yourself off, get up, and start again.
How do you do that for yourself? Because I'm sure this pathway has been.
Yeah.
How do you keep focused?
Today we're really, we're have been in lockdown. We're starting to gradually come out. We see a lot of this. We're all concerned about the infection rate of COVID. We, concerned for our families, for our friends, for our neighbors. The economy has been like, for the service part of the industry has been, disastrous. And so there's certainly been a lot of, obstacles and challenges, but we get through it. The world is, finds a way to get through it. And I think the most important thing that you have to do is, you have to understand your limits. And so, like for me, like when you say when things get frustrating, find other interests. So exercise is important. Getting away from your desktop and getting outside, go for a walk, go for a run, do something physically active that takes your mind off of it and kind of helps you to refresh. I mean, that's what I do. I mean, I basically, when I'm frustrated or whatever, kind of push away from the desk, because we're all inside now.
Yes.
Put on a mask, go outside for either a walk or a run or whatever you do, and you come back and then, you kind of clear your mind. One other thing that I would also encourage entrepreneurs and others is never underestimate the power of a good night's sleep. I mean, there were times in my life, obviously traveling around the world, I would be operating on 3, 4, 5 hours of sleep from an international flight, getting into, the Asia Pacific region, jumping into a meeting. But I'm able to tell myself, hey, I've been traveling for like 20 hours. You need to recognize that you're tired, or you need to have some understanding of your capabilities or your limitations. So the next thing that I would encourage any entrepreneur, anyone who's doing this, is never underestimate the need or the power of getting a good night's sleep. Sleep is not accumulative. It's not like, well, I'll sleep on the plane or I'll sleep 2 hours the next day. It doesn't work like that. You have to be fresh, and you have to make sure that your thinking is clear. And so that's an important part of it too. An advice for a young business person is to find someone that you admire, that you've read about, and try to find that individual to be a mentor for you. And I have found in the course of life that successful people enjoy helping other people. They do. So find a mentor, someone who you can sort of contact, be in touch with. But if you're going to do that, also demonstrate that you're committed to this process, so you can also show that individual that the advice they're giving you, you're actually using. At least maybe not not all of it, but that the time you're taking with that individual, that you're demonstrating that you're also adhering to it, or you're understanding it, and that you're progressing. But having a mentor is, I think, in your early stage of business, even if you're working for a large corporation or inside of a public institution, finding a mentor that you can model yourself after is important.
And Cliff, is it more about finding, do you think it's one, several? Did you have mentors before, or how was the mentorship in your case done? Or do you still have mentors? How is that?
Yeah, well, it's not easy. I say, like you, I don't think it's good to have multiple mentors, but I think there's different roles that certain people play. I mean, you can certainly have someone who can advise you from a financial position, or advise you from, family life or things like that. But a mentor in business is the industry you're in, someone who's demonstrated success, who can make an introduction for you, who can help, utilize a network to help you become successful. I mean, it's not a crutch. It's not like that person's going to make you successful, but it's a gateway or a door opener for you. And there's some responsibility that comes from the person who's attaching themselves to a mentor as well. But so, in an industry, there's a mentor, that's someone that you find who's a successful business person. It could be somebody who's you've worked with in the past, or you've wanted to work for, or however you identify that individual. It could be a family member. But in an industry where you're trying to enter into it, and there's barriers to entry, and you need to try to kind of move your way through it, my advice is to find someone who's successful in that industry. So, focus on that and try to get some relationships built. It really helps, and it just, you have to be patient. People are busy, but where I am at in my life, I'm sort of beyond the stage where I can find a mentor. I've certainly had one or two really good mentors. They were, unfortunately, the one that I found earlier passed away way too soon from, a guy who was very committed to his work, and the stress of work or whatever, nutrition or whatever happened, unfortunately passed away from a heart disease. And it was during a run. So, I mean, we were always very, very, sort of athletic and trying to stay physically fit. And this poor guy, didn't quite make it. But anyhow, he was a very interesting mentor for me because he was a leader in his field. He demanded perfection. He has empathy. He certainly had the empathy, but he demanded, don't waste his time. Come to the meetings prepared. And that's one thing that I've learned about executives. It's like, if you're going to come into a meeting, come prepared. Don't waste their time. If they've asked you to do an assignment, get it done, and be prepared to talk about it and defend your position, but don't walk in. Never try to wing it. What are the sort of key phrases about a motto that I march to? It's what I would call the 4 P's. It's preparation prevents poor performance, and you really got to be prepared.
That's I've never heard that one. That's the 4 P's.
I think it's, I mean, I didn't make it up. I think it's pretty common in like military, the 4 P's. But if you're going to go into a meeting, or if you're going to go into even a conversation like this, I mean, have done your research, do some preparation. It'll prevent poor performance. So if you're going to work with a mentor, or if you're going to come into an executive style meeting and you're a young entrepreneur, a young, maybe a manager in an office where you're looking to grow, you're a new one, just be prepared. Be prepared for those meetings. Take the time to prepare for them. You can't overestimate the importance of preparation.
Sure, you listen to a lot of things, a lot of problems. What do you think companies are struggling more these days, if you had to identify these? I say this in two ways, because I heard right now from you, and even before, that for the company itself, it's the financing in the beginning. But on the other side, what do you hear more from the customers? What is the thing that you hear more in your sector? That is like, why is this even happening? And I had a story yesterday that was an engineer to find a part, Googles the part, checks the drawing, calls the supplier, the supplier doesn't answer. And someone was telling me, Kartik was telling me that this doesn't make sense. I have a PhD in thermodynamics. I'm Googling parts. How can the market be doing something like this? You see, it's like an absurd. We are doing things that going to the moon and we are still Googling information, or instead of having more of a smart system. So I'm looking at things like that. What are crazy things that you see people struggling these days that they shouldn't be struggling?
Yeah, that's so crazy. But it's funny you mentioned that. I served on as a moderator on a panel about a month ago. It was the Pacific Northwest Aerospace Association, and the panel that I was moderating was how to be a good supplier to the industry, right? So, what do customers look for? So customers look for really trust, transparency. If they give you an order, are you going to be late with that order? Are you going to be able to demonstrate that if you have a problem, to communicate it early? So, the idea of trust is really important. Transparency, trust, a good communicator. There's questions of, does your technology that you're bringing to the customer, you may not have, like for a company that I look at in the new space economy, some of these manufacturers don't really have the heritage of manufacturing much at this point. They're doing new things. Yes. So if you don't have the heritage, can you leapfrog the technology curve to get us to where we need to get to sooner? But what is the sort of, what's holding you up? What is your your strength? What do you have to sort of, if we're going to launch a satellite based on your component parts and you have very limited space heritage, why should I take that risk with you?
Okay.
So credibility is built on trust, honesty, and I don't mind working with innovative companies. It's just you need to make sure that you have a reliable communication and that you're being told, giving accurate information back and forth. So customers really want to look for, groups that they have a relationship with. There's a credible trust component to that, that the company they're working with has proven themselves, or that individual that they work with has proven themselves. You can't hold up a launch date. So if you're working with a company that's got a launch date that's been contracted with from, let's say, Virgin Orbit or SpaceX or Arianespace, you've got a launch window that you have to meet. So you have a manufacturing production timetable that you got to get to. You can't miss that launch period, because that's the economics, and the breach of that would be disastrous.
Yes.
So you try to work with companies that have the ability to get you there. Now, there are always problems along the way, even with the most sort of experienced companies. But to answer your question, directly, it's trust, it's communications and credibility.
I also wrote down focus on the lead time, because that's kind of when you talked about you cannot miss a launch date. If all the lead times are organized and we have like you said, trust is in there, it's transparent, we don't miss the launch date. So do you see lead times being pushed a lot, or how is that?
Well, yeah, I mean, right now, and particularly where we have supply chain disruptions, their supply chains need to get re-geared up under the current, situation that we're in. We have global supply chains, global dependencies on companies around the world. Nobody knows where they are, so to speak. But as we get back online, we're getting more and more. There's probably a little bit more leniency, because in a contract, there's contractual language. Maybe a pandemic is one that gives you some relief from the day, but in a normal environment, supply chain management is critical. Being able to lead times that's a decision point where when you're talking to a vendor or procuring a contract, what are your lead times to get that part to me? And then so you're willing to pay more for a compressed lead time. If lead time and what we call the long pole in the tent, those long lead time items can be stretched out, you can negotiate a little more, because you have less, you have less concern, or the leverage is not working against you. When there's time constraints, vendors know that. I mean, they raise their prices and they push you, and they
Yes.
know that it's it's just the way it is that there's a dependency and there's a compressed time frame, and to try to get yourself into a production table, it takes an effort. But I have found in this world many times, this may sound sort of brash, but if you have a checkbook and you can afford to pay for it, you can push yourself in. I mean, money talks, so, and that's not something that entrepreneurs like myself always have access to. So that's why there needs to be a mutual alignment of interest. It's nice to have a vendor who has some skin in the game with you, so that you don't miss those timeframes. So some vendors are willing to provide vendor financing, and in that case, at least there's an alignment, and then some of your time constraints have more of a sort of higher probability of being met.
And Cliff, you mentioned skin in the game. How do you emphasize skin in the game in your company, that is in your projects? Because coming from the consulting side in process improvement, there are ways to do this, but at the end, it's the company that implements recommendations. So my skin in the game can be, or sometimes is, to support the implementation directly, going to the shop floor, working with the managers and doing this.
Yeah.
How is it in your in your company?
There's kind of two levels of having skin in the game, or what I would just call an aligned interest. Your employees and your staff, your consultants, your contractors, they are willing to take some compensation, in the early days, reduce compensation in exchange for having an equity position in the company.
Okay.
So that's an alignment of interest.
Yes.
You have vendors who will be willing to take maybe a financial sort of amortized schedule on payment. They're willing to sort of help you get started. They're willing to help finance you through their accounts receivable.
Yes, for example.
So that's skin in the game. So wherever, it's usually the skin in the game has an economic sort of connotation to it. So there's a lot of different areas where you find that. If you're in a highly regulated industry, your lawyers may be willing to give you, to get started, some kind of a reduced payment plan. That's skin in the game. So it's, again, it really comes down to almost all of your vendors willing to support you, and that's a vote of confidence. I mean, when you have that kind of commitment from the people around you, whether they're contractors, employees, vendors, landlords, whoever, when you're in the position of a startup, you got multiple parties with skin in the game. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, no, you did, absolutely. Did you had any failures, or did the failure set you up for success? And essentially, is there a favorite one that you said, this was a failure, and because of that, I could do something else?
Yeah, I'm not ashamed to talk about any of that, but if you haven't failed at something, then you're just not authentic. I mean, failing is like a part of this business. You don't want to fail too much, and you don't want to. I don't have a favorite failure, because they were all painful or they all had consequences. But it's really the lesson you learn. If you're going to fail at something, know why you fail. Kind of recognize it. I mean, you don't want to have too many learning experiences where you failed. And as I said, I don't have a favorite one that I would reference. They're all painful, but make sure you learn from it, that you try not to repeat it too many times, and understand why it failed. I mean, for me, I depend a lot on relationships with partners, and if I had a favorite, one that bothers me the most is like, you do your due diligence, you spend a lot of time learning about partners and who you're going to work with and the dependencies, and you kind of learn that maybe that partner wasn't the right partner for you. There was, some things that occur. Don't go into those relationships being naive. Friends are friends, partners are partners. Make sure that you get good legal advice when you enter into a contract. Things that you learn are like non-circumvention, where the person can go around you, Understand that a 50-50 partnership usually is never 50-50. One party brings more to it than the other party.
Okay.
So and you need to be able to state that. I've gone into partners in foreign countries where it's a 50-50 partnership. You go, yeah, but I'm actually working it, and I'm actually bringing my relationships, and I understand all the things that you're doing. You need to quantify what a 50-50 partnership is. So it's things like that. I mean, how do you fail? It's part of the game. You may not be a total failure, partially you failed, but you just got to have that stick with it attitude and have strong shoulders and it has consequences for sure. I mean, there's this day of reckoning when you have a failure, but you just need to be able to defend yourself and my point is that you got to be honest with who you're dealing with and what you're doing. And so if it's an honest failure, there's no harm in that, but you got to move on. You just got to move on and correct it and learn from it. And that's the best advice I can tell you. If you're out there as a young entrepreneur and you haven't failed at something, then you haven't earned your stripes yet. And if you got lucky early, God bless you, more power to you. Okay. You need to know what made you successful. Understand why you were successful, because a lot of companies get success quickly and they don't know how they became successful. Whereas if you ask somebody who failed, they'll tell you why they failed.
Oh, yes.
So you got to balance it, but hopefully the scale's balanced so that you're successful in projects than you are as a failed attempt. Just call it a failed attempt, not a failure.
Failed attempt. Okay, I like the review of the definition. As you walk through this life and the several companies that you've built, you've been at, were there any books that you used, or there are like influences for you that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, at different times of your life, there are certain things that you read that influence you and build your thoughts. In today's world, there's so much information coming at you, whether you're reading emails or you're reading white papers. So it's really hard to read a full book unless you're on a flight and you have some quiet time.
Good. Okay.
But there are. I mean, the early part of my life, I was big in team sports. I enjoyed the world of team sports. I played basketball, on the playgrounds, and a big influence in my era was Vince Lombardi, who was, just absolute motivator, and he talked about sacrifice. And so I read in my, I guess, upper school days, I read a book called, How to Be Number One. And it really wasn't so much about, what you needed to do. It really talked about anything worthwhile is going to take commitment. I mean, for an athlete, there are some athletes that are naturally gifted athletes, but to get to that super level, you've got to put in the time and you've got to work hard. So in that, although I've never become a super athlete or any stretch of the imagination, I felt that his book was an interesting way for a young high school individual who was in athletics to try to understand how to be successful, not just in athletics, but also in life. And this idea of building teams was always important.
Okay.
So that was an early book that I read. And then, I guess more, and then there's this other just kind of idea that I had later, and it was not that much later, maybe 2016 or 17, a more recent book was the book that was written, actually it's right here because I pulled it to the side by, I'm not going to do a book review, but Satya Nadella, who is the CEO of Microsoft. It's called Hit Refresh. Microsoft's had this brilliant career, and so has this individual who's worked up. But what he stated in the book that really hit home to me was this idea of empathy, having empathy for not just your work, but just in life. A question that was asked someone during an interview, if you saw, someone stumble on the street or, something going this way, or how would you react to it? The most important thing that entrepreneurs need to have, I think, to sort of round them out, is they need to have empathy. They need to understand what the situation another person's in. Don't be so one-sided in whether it's a negotiation or it's a situation in your office or with a customer, or just in general, and that book brought that out. And I started thinking differently after reading it. Sure, it was interesting about Microsoft's push into artificial intelligence, quantum computing, edge computing, and all the new things that this individual was bringing into cloud computing, bringing into Microsoft. But his sort of promotion of empathy for people, in general, made it stuck with me for a while. And I think my last 6 years after reading that has given me a totally different perspective of how to just treat people. Put yourself in their shoes. I mean, you gotta get your mission accomplished, but just have a better understanding for the people around you and for people that you come in contact with. So that was an important book for me.
Okay, yes. So I'm listening to you and Microsoft to think about all the tech things, and then you bring empathy as a tool, correct? As a mindset. That's really yeah. It makes me think a lot. Like always in the go get it, and sometimes you don't see around. You just see. I need to get this done. I need to get the plan done. I need to get the sale done. I need to get the project done. And sometimes I would say that when looking into a customer, what I feel is that we really need to breathe more and understanding in which position he is, because it's not the checkbook cannot be the ultimate. I cannot be the ultimate thing.
Exactly. I mean, that's exactly right.
As you move, what kind of and this book was in 16 years ago. I was like, wow. No, 6 years or 16.
About 6 years ago. So I mean, but it probably took me 2 years to read it because I was like on a plane. Not quite, but I was just we have so much information coming at us all the time. It's hard to find time just to open a book to read. So that book was read while on international flights. It probably took me 100,000 miles to read that book.
Okay. And this comes back to one of the questions that we have that we're talking about. That is, what kind of investments have you done that you think are really worthwhile? And anything, either for your company or for your personal life, that you say this was really all worth it.
Right. Well, there's two. One is education. I mean, investment in your education, I think, is just so important, and it's the best you can possibly make. And you're never too old to sort of learn or to invest in yourself. So education is important. I had the opportunity to go back to school after I created a small business in the mid 80s. I took a step back after that company was sold, and I went to business school. And, it was very, at that time, getting a master's degree in business administration, there's this sort of like utilization curve of like, how much am I paying for this and how much am I actually going to use it? So it's an expensive commitment, but at the end of it was probably the most important investment I made. And I think it goes back to the friends that I've met, the relationships that I've developed, the retooling for myself, understanding sort of a higher degree of analytical thinking. So investment in education, whether it's for yourself or for your children or for anybody else, that is very important. If I had to rank the second area, it would probably be in travel. It's important to travel. It's important to see the world. It's important to take in your news sources and how you gather information from international perspective. Get out. I've always done business mostly internationally. Is to invest your time in international business or travel, or if it's leisure, do something that gets you outside of your individual country. Learn a little bit more about other cultures, what people do, and how look when you first go to, let's say, a country like Japan or South Korea or Germany, you start seeing this innovation, that you may not see in your own country. So get outside of your national boundaries and see what's going on in various countries. That's important. And then, I mean, one of the other things I think is really important is to, aside from your relationships with your family and making the investment with them, whether it's, monetary, but mostly time that you commit to your family, it's important to be loved and to love someone. I mean, it helps you grow. It gives you some kind of balance. And as maybe soft as that sounds, it's really important. And then I've always felt that, keeping yourself fit physically, from whether just some exercise, mentally, nutrition wise, you cannot keep a schedule. You cannot travel the world. You can't do the things and accomplish your goals unless you have some degree of physical fitness. I mean, to be able to get on a plane and fly 12 hours, 14 hours, get into a meeting, present do a PowerPoint presentation, being able to go to dinner that night or whatever you have to do. You only have, when you travel is expensive. You're not going on a leisure vacation. You've got a set goal. You're doing it on usually if you're an entrepreneur, you're doing it on a very shoestring budget. You're not spending a lot of money on multiple nights in hotels. You're compressing your time. You've got to be sharp. You got to be on it. You're probably going to a meeting without having even, gotten a night's sleep. So the only way you get through that, at least for what worked for me, is being able to have some degree of physical fitness, mental and physically. And it's a big part of, taking care of just take care of yourself, nutrition. So I eat my share of junk foods and things in airports or whatever. I mean, I'm not, fanatical. I'm right down the middle. I'm not like, an extremist on anyone's side, but I think just keeping it right down the middle, just be consistent and keeping yourself, fit to be able to accomplish your goals. Take that time to invest in yourself. Take that time to understand, like, did I get a good night's sleep? Am I doing the right thing? Am I, just try to avoid excessive living. I mean, in general. So so invest in that. Yeah. Invest in yourself.
Okay. You talked about keeping fit. What is your fitness routine? Do you do running? Do you do push-ups? Do you go to the gym?
It depends. I'm getting a little older. I do like to run, but my running has slowed down and I feel a little pain in my hip or whatever, but I work through it. I like to get some cardio. So let's say I like to get some degree of cardio in, and the cardio usually is attached to some sort of balance. So if you're cycling, you also develop a sense of balance when you're cycling. If you're walking, you also maintain a sense of balance. So I do like the idea of cardio, not inside. I don't like to be inside. If it's a cold day, I bundle up and get that cool, fresh air.
Okay.
Kind of like take it easy, but get out. I like to get my cardio outdoors. I do think it's important to develop your core. So some like light resistance, some weight work. Or even just, what you can do as like floor Pilates with some kind of resistance. It's important. So those are the kinds of things. I don't want to get into a physical fitness way of life, but doing something like that is important.
Since we are talking about advice, what do you see? What is a good advice for a smart-driven student college, or for anyone that is right now entering the space domain when they meet what people call the real world? Whatever real world means. What kind of things you'd say, yes, this is good, and what kind of things you'd say, man, forget that. Don't listen to them.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think going back to the idea of having a mentor and kind of finding a mentor is important. And I think rather than going back and rehashing, I think for a young business person coming out of school, coming into an industry, is network as much as you can, and then try to identify an individual or multiple individuals who you can feel can help guide you. So that is really important, and also understand a little bit about the industry. Is it an industry that's a mature industry? Is it dying off? I mean, are you getting into like an industry sector that is sort of losing ground? Like right now, I think anything in space is very hot. Small satellite constellations. launch companies who are able to launch quickly with a very fast launch cadence, engineering components for those companies, but understanding the industry, the sector or the market sector of the industry that you're going into, try to understand, is this a growth side of the of the industry, or is it kind of shrinking? Am I getting into a commercial project, or am I getting into what I would call government contracting? And try to understand sort of, where you want to fit, where the growth is, and that's important. Am I getting into aeronautics, or am I getting into, a ground segment infrastructure? Am I, what part of that, industry sector makes sense for you, and where are your interests? I mean, where are your level of interest? So if I was advising, again, I'd try to figure out where the level of excitement is for this individual, focus that onto an industry company, find out which companies are doing, the things that you want to do, and then try to identify someone in that company that you might be able to align yourself with.
And Cliff, you've been between worlds, West and the other side. You're gonna work in Asia. How did that, I'm gonna call it, love came in? Because I saw your papa like, oh, well, you are in the US, but then you move into education, and then you started working on the other side of, I'm gonna call it the Atlantic, but in another place where the way of thinking is just different from ours in the West. How did that? Was it serendipity? How did you?
Yeah, a little bit of both. But again, I talked about education. I talked about business school. In my business school class, I sat next to an individual who eventually became a very close confidant of mine, who was from Beijing. And we'll just go on first name. Simon was somebody who said, you ought to see what's going on in Asia. You would do really well here because it's a market that's growing. So through that connection, sitting next to a classmate, being friendly, took me to, we went to visit his family. His father was a professor at Tsinghua University, was a very technical, sort of like the MIT, if you will, of China. And when I got there, I just felt the connection. I felt that I was able to kind of learn little parts of the language quickly, felt that the economy like this was going to just start growing. So I started to find myself attached to it, felt that there was an affinity towards it. I felt good and comfortable in that environment. I enjoyed their food. I enjoyed their people. I enjoyed that it was sort of like on the verge of growth, this explosive growth. So all these things played into it, and a little bit of luck. I was able to find myself in a position where the first opportunity was actually the financing of a satellite uplink facility coming out of Taiwan, Taipei, and it was sort of a entrepreneurial group that was building an uplink facility, and their first customer was a company that was called CNN Broadcasting that nobody ever heard of. It was kind of Ted Turner Network, and so the uplink service was going to be providing services for them and other cable TV operators. So then I got in from that experience, moved in from the financing side of it, and developing the actual road pitch or road show for that. Learned to speak some Mandarin, was able to talk local languages, and then was able to sort of move into the operational side, and then sort of my career sort of went from there. But I always felt comfortable in Asia. Felt that I was able to pick up languages quickly. I think it's just a common sort of skill set that you have, like with regard to being able to mimic. You can mimic when you hear a dialogue, you kind of feel the rhythm of it. In certain countries, I felt more comfortable or felt an affinity towards. And I felt that way in most of the Asian countries. So I was able to kind of make my way around. But with the company I have now, with Cloud Constellation, where I've spent probably the last 3.5, 4 years more in the Gulf region, learning the culture there. It's a big difference. So, but I felt, it took me a little while to understand, some of the different cultures within, the 4 or 5 countries that I've traveled throughout and developed relationships. I love being in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh. There's some wonderful families there and people that we work with, institutions, Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE. So you kind of find yourself just being able to align yourself culturally with different groups to understand their culture, understand, where what they're about, and you bridge relationships not just from a business but also from a human to human. So it's just something that always interests me. I mean, I've enjoyed it. So so what drives that? I don't know. I mean, some people are comfortable just staying home and walking to work or whatever. I've always enjoyed the international experience. I found I've when I was working at Cable and Wireless, I was in London, but even at another company, I worked in places like Moldova. I worked
Yeah.
in Europe where we were building telecommunication networks out for countries. I mean, there's areas of the world that, it's interesting, it's exciting, and it's, kind of something that I've always enjoyed. And so I've pushed myself in that direction.
Okay. We've talked to a lot of things, but there is one that I would love you to talk about. That is, how did you found the space hack? That is, you
Yeah.
talked about, I don't know, well, I can pause in here, but later editing, the way that the critical thinking about what exists and how can I use it to benefit my customers, avoiding complexity, and how could you put your company operating all over the world? I would love you to tell that story, because it's brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about it. So in any communication, whether it's, especially if you're doing international communications, if you're in that market, and in satellite in particular, you need to be registered as a licensed, operator in a country. You need to have a partner who's a licensed operator, or you need to comply with the regulatory regimes. And those regulatory regimes can be extremely defensive for the country. It's hard to break through because local operators, if you're operating in, whether it's an Asian country or in the Middle East or whatever, those embedded incumbent operators have a lot of power. They don't just let competitors come into their markets. So if you're going to provide any kind of international, what we call our traffic data, or data traffic coming into those countries, there are high barriers to entry. And one big part of that is getting a license to operate in a country. And if you're building a global model and you say, I've got to have 30 countries to be able to make the business case close, you've got to be able to operate in all these countries, especially in the larger markets, India, China, Russia, Australia, name them. So those countries are not easy to get licensed in for a communications company. I mean, you can file for it, you can spend a lot of money. There's a lot of unfortunate stories where companies go down the wrong path and they get themselves in trouble. Well, anyhow, we came up with this idea. It was not my idea. Again, this is the founder of Cloud Constellation, the inventor, Hu Shang. We were talking about, how our reflectors, or if you're facing the Earth, you've got to communicate with all these countries' networks. Well, in the satellite communications industry, you've got multiple geostationary satellites that are 22,000 miles above the Earth in a stationary position with a beam focused on hemi beams or on certain geographic locations. They already have international licenses. They are already licensed to operate all over the world. These are companies like Intelsat, SES, Arabsat regionally, Eutelsat, and so on. And they're all over the equatorial, plane. So our idea was, what if we flipped our reflectors up and we fly underneath these guys and we just use their up and down links into all those countries where they already are licensed, and we're just a customer of theirs. What if we just design our constellation in that manner? And it was a brilliant idea. And we went to talk to those operators that I mentioned about buying an in-orbit transponder. And they were thinking, like, why are you doing that? And then they got it. They understood what we were doing. They're basically our cell towers to be able to deliver traffic. They're already licensed. So whether we talk to investors or operators, they were just like, wow, that's such a brilliant idea. It was such a brilliant idea that we encouraged our company and the founder to patent that idea, to take it to the US Trade and Patent Office and get it filed. And because of his age, he was over the age of 75 at the time, the US Trade and Patent Office accelerated the patent issuing so that he could, so you could enjoy your patent while you're still alive. That
Yes.
became a strategy for us. So we began filing multiple patents. We built up a patent portfolio based on this concept of inter-satellite links, connecting GEO to LEO, LEO to GEO, GEO to GEO, MEO, all the different components without having to have actually land our own traffic on the ground, and avoiding what we were told by this really innovative Palo Alto, technology company. Wow, that is the ultimate hack against regulatory regimes. And so we kind of adopted that, and so that's how it happened. And it was a very clever, very, that there's an engineering solution to a problem that just came out, and it was very creative thinking. And yeah, it differentiated us. When we presented that slide, when we showed that we're not using the LEOs, don't communicate with the ground, we're communicating with the existing GEOs, it was like that was like our money shot. I mean, that was like where the people would sit back and go, whoa, okay, who came up with that? I mean, there are people now trying to copy it. I mean, there are groups that we were coming across, without naming names, that they're, we can see their business plans, and they're talking about utilizing that concept. There could be a potential patent infringement, but because I always think in a very affirmative way, I don't look at it as a patent infringement. I look at it as an opportunity for us to license our technology to them to create some revenue for both of us.
Yeah, that's a overwhelming and beautiful story, because when you start thinking about it graphically, it's like, wow, this is amazing.
Why didn't I think of that? So
Cliff, it says you drive a lot of things. How do you maintain, that is, if you feel overwhelmed, I'm sure your calendar, meetings, family, how do you say, okay, I need to stop? How do you regain focus?
Yeah, what I learned in life, there are two types of people. One who just wake up in the morning and they look at their email and they react to it. Okay, there are other people who are sending the email out and getting other people to react.
Okay.
And, when I was a young executive working for companies and working for other people, and I still very driven by my email. And like, I used to wake up in the morning, I'd do a little meditation, get my brain set, drink my 2 cups of coffee. I would open my email before that. And that would disrupt my whole, that was going to drive me in the direction of my day. And then as I got a little more mature, I don't do that any longer. Now I take care of what I want to take care of for the first 2 hours of being awake. And I protect myself from that inbound email. And if it's really important, if it's an emergency, it's pretty much going to be a text message from somebody I know. And so I try to be careful about, being what I would call driven or pushed into something by someone else's email. And so that's the first thing, is how to protect yourself about, and just recognize it. When I open my email in the morning, am I reacting to someone else's problem, or is this really something that is important to me? So that's one thing, is to sort of mitigate and sort of retire some of that anxiety in the morning, because that's how your day starts. And then, it's important, when I think about it, it's just try to, like, the problem solving. I mean, how to be a mutual problem solver, like recognizing that, a lot of the emails you get aren't always pleasant, or there aren't always someone telling you how great you are. It's usually you've got a problem that you have to solve. And, just be a mutual problem solver. Don't try to do it all yourself. Part of the learning experience for somebody else is to give that other person a chance to help you solve that problem. Don't try to do it all yourself. Now, when you're a young entrepreneur starting out, that's a hard thing to do, because you feel you can do it better yourself by the time you explain it to somebody else. But try to mature and delegate and bring in some consensus. I mean, if it's a deadline that you have to get done, just sit down and get it done. But don't overwhelm yourself. These are things that you can protect yourself against. Don't try to overwhelm yourself in areas that you can help divide up and get other people to participate in. Unless you're just a one-man show, but you gotta resolve problems in a reasonable amount of time. I'm not saying ignore your emails. You got to react to them. And I'm a big believer in telling others, is like, if you get an email from somebody, try to respond to it. I mean, don't just blow it off and ignore it. Even all these ads and things you get on LinkedIn from people wanting to connect to you, and some of them are annoying and stuff. Look, if someone's trying to sell you something, we've all been there. Kind of respond, say, hey, I'm not a candidate for that right now, but thank you for reaching out. Good luck to you. You know, just you can't do it to everybody, but I'm just saying, you know, the point is, my first point, don't be driven in the morning by inbound emails. Kind of collect yourself and get yourself positioned. When you're overwhelmed, we talked about, you know, what your releases are, whether it's music, whether it's a book, whether it's going outside and going for a run or whatever. But again, starting your day in a mind frame that you're not being driven by somebody else's email is really important. I think that if I had to give that one thing and state that as a, you know, something to live by, is review your emails, review your inbounds, but give yourself a chance to kind of get your day, get your feet under your desk before you start reacting.
Really? Okay. You mentioned, do you still meditate?
Yeah. It's
Okay.
important.
It is. Do you do any specific meditation? I'll tell you why. I've been doing TM, that is Transcendental Meditation, since 1993 or something like that. I discovered as the ultimate hack. Like I discovered meditation as a hack to a lot of things. But have you been doing meditation for a while? How?
So I got introduced to transcendental meditation in 1975. I was young, and there was a big push, you know, from the Maharishi back then. I had some. I was in the 70s, college age. I mean, Maharishi was a big deal, and I went through that. But you know, that was a repetitive mantra that
Yes.
somewhat I've dismissed. I've gone into something a little more geared for me. So my meditation practice is, you know, not repetition, but going more to, you know, sort of going inside yourself and kind of understanding who you are, and without getting too involved, that could be a whole nother subject. Create a meditation that works for you, you know, for a way in which you can get yourself calm down, get your mind settled, but get your mind prepared. I think what's important is that you need to block out anything negative coming into your, you know, into your psychic. You need to protect yourself against that. You need to be strong. So my meditation is really getting my brain stronger, like protecting myself, being centered, you know, spiritually, or, you know, whatever you believe in, whether, you know, whatever God you pray to, whatever is important, having some spiritual kind of belief. But then protecting yourself from a mental perspective is get yourself settled. A repetitive mantra is kind of interesting, you know, when you're starting out, but it also somewhat kind of puts you to sleep. You kind of find yourself being a little tired. You get up, and then well, if you feel tired, it means you didn't get enough sleep, and that's not accurate, because I just had an 8-hour sleep, and now I'm doing a meditation in the morning, saying the same phrase over and over, and I find myself kind of going to sleep, which, you know, part of that is getting yourself into a state of mind. But I think it's more important to kind of get inside yourself and to recognize what you want to strengthen. Your mind is such a powerful tool, this sort of muscle reaction, getting your brain to kind of like work for you beyond where you are just using a small percentage of it, but also letting your body know that, you know, you're trying to protect yourself, heal yourself, and get yourself ready for the day. And, you know, so meditation, however you do it, you could be just looking out your window and letting yourself go, just unwind. But my meditation process is something it works for me. And that's what I would advise you, is like, you know, or anyone else, you know, find something that works for you, get trained, whether it's through a transcendental meditation, learn how to meditate, and then find something that works for you.
Okay, that's very interesting. That I found meditation really it's an unsung practice, or well, it's really different. The fact that I understand what you're saying. It's the mantra, and I've tried other sorts of meditation. I said, let me try and I feel different things. It's like it's a wonderful tool. One last question on meditation: do you do it twice a day or just once?
Usually in the morning, and then toward the end of the day. But if you feel really stressed, I mean, if you feel your heart rate jumping, and there are times where you can really feel in certain situations, you know, it's good to take a breather, just kind of sit back in your chair, close your eyes, go through your motions, get yourself settled. And it's really about getting your heart rate down. I mean, I don't have high blood pressure or anything like that, but it's about getting your anxiety levels down, slowing your breathing down, and then saying, okay, everything's, is good. You can't make decisions when you're anxious. You can't make smart decisions. In a world of like that we're in, the things that are really troubling is usually financial pressure for a young business person or any business person is high anxiety, health issues, high anxiety. Business problems you can solve. You can solve business problems, but financial issues, health issues are things that require you to really be careful. So meditation around things like that, during the day, help to settle things down. So, a lot of people go through life, they have a health issue or they have a financial issue. And if it's just a business issue, you can solve business issues, they're solvable. Financial issues, health issues are a little more anxiety.
Okay. We've covered a lot, and from great stories. And I really, when I was looking into you, I was like, how did you end up in the other side of the world? Now I got that. I know now a bit more of the story behind. Since we are departing, at least at this conversation, is there any quote or motto that you like to give to the ones that we listen?
I don't have any really major quote, but I guess one quote that is a family quote that actually through my wife and the school that she went to, which I've always found interesting, it's the quote that they use is find a way or make one. It's like this determination, and it's an all-girls school, and their quote for them was find a way or make one. And so I've always kind of felt that was an interesting quote because my daughter has gone to the same school my wife went to, and now I have granddaughters, and we teach them the same thing. So it's a generational thing, and so that would be my only quote that I would kind of think about when you're in a situation. Either you find a solution to it or you make one of your own.
Cliff, thank you very much. Great conversation. I'll put this out there as we move forward. Again, your whole idea of processes in here for companies and then you pull them up to space, and then in space you invert. It's just.
I appreciate your interest, actually, Gonzalez. Thank you so much for taking the time, and I've enjoyed the conversation. In the next conversation, I'm going to ask you questions about where you're going to go. And so we get that out there.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. So that's it. Cliff Beek, CEO, President of the Cloud Constellation Corporation. Find a solution or make one. This is a wide conversation. So much great advice, both for life and entrepreneurs. Mainly focus on space, this new economy, new space, and Cliff was just outstanding. I thank him so much. And thank you all for being there and listening. New podcasts will be coming in, and I hope you enjoy them. Reach me out over the contacts on LinkedIn, and I'll be there for you. Enjoy your day, night, all the times and the places that you are. Gonzalo, out.